I am.
All right. I'm going to turn off my camera and mute my mic. And guys, the show is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. I am going to quickly figure out how to share my screen. Uh-oh.
Come on, Avery. You've rocked it for all the others.
There it is. Yeah, I know. All right. There. Can you guys see me now?
We can.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. This is our, I guess, third and final webinar of the series. So, Kristen, thank you so much for having us and kind of providing this platform during these times. You know, it's pretty crazy not being able to go out and see our customers every day like we're used to. So we're really grateful for these opportunities. So today we're going to kind of round out that series, put all of those puzzle pieces together that we've been talking about, the ADAS verification, you know, structural damage and identifying that. We're going to kind of plug all those pieces together and talk about when to measure and why. So luckily, last week, or I guess it was maybe a week and a half ago now, 10 days, we were lucky enough to have Roger come and join us from Accountable Estimating. And if you missed that webinar on structural analysis, I really recommend you go and follow the link and watch that. Because Roger, I think we had a lot of fun in putting that together. But Roger agreed to come back today and jump on with us one more time for this final webinar. And we also have Sergio on the line with us too, our Director of Training. So we will move through this pretty quickly. It's not too terribly long like our last one. It's just kind of plugging all those pieces together like we talked about. So one question that we get a lot, especially when we go out to train shops who are putting the wand into their shop is, you know, which vehicles that come into my shop should I be measuring? You know, what are the indicators? And they're looking for this fix-all answer, and there really isn't an answer. You know, they're curious, you know, do I need to measure every single car that's coming into my shop? And when you look at it that way, you know, I don't think there's just a hard, fast rule. You shouldn't be measuring every single car that comes into your shop. You know, it doesn't make sense. If you're just doing PDR work on a car, you're not going to measure that. But, you know, do I need to measure something as small as this bumper repair that's only going to be a few hours of repair? Or do I wait until I have something more along the lines where I'm actually going to be expecting that structural damage? You know, what's the correct answer? And I think we've traditionally been approaching this question fundamentally wrong. It's not which vehicles that come into the shop should we be measuring, but rather when during the repair process should we be thinking about measuring. You know, that damage there on the left-hand side on that bumper doesn't necessarily warrant any measuring, but different factors about the loss or different components that are included on that car definitely could play a role into whether you measure during that repair or not. There could be an ADAS sensor or a bracket directly below there that had direct contact that might call for measuring, or there could be nothing and it's just a simple bumper repair. Roger, you know, what are some things that you're looking for when you're determining when you need to measure?
Well, if I take a look at that image on the left there with the bumper cover, you can see that the impact did catch it in the face of the bumper. And so I've got to look at that, even though that bumper cover looks like it's minor in nature and repairable. It's what's behind there that I'm concerned about. And so if I have direct contact to that bumper beam, I want to start checking the structure of that car in the back area. Or if it was a side swipe like the one on the left with a sensor behind it, I want to remove that cover so I can see if the quarter panel behind the cover is out of position. So if I think I have structural contact, or if I think I have anything that has ADAS equipment involved. But there's one other piece that we'll talk about later that confirms whether we really need to measure further or not, and that is whether we need to calibrate, and we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Sure. So when it comes to when to measure, really we need to think about measuring before the repair process. All of our diagnostic measurements that are going to kind of tell us, you know, what path this vehicle is going to take in our shop. We need to be measuring during the repair process, repair measurements. This is what we've been doing traditionally in the industry for a while now. We're pretty good at doing these measurements. This is on the bench, you know, tracking that pool. These are the measurements that you're traditionally getting paid for right now with your set of measure. And we also need to be considering after the repair process what kind of measuring steps we need to take in that post-repair scenario. All of these play together, and you can definitely get paid for multiples of these. It's not like you're only getting paid in one area. You can get paid for those diagnostic measurements as well. That's definitely needed to determine what's going to be happening with these cars, especially these newer vehicles with the newer features and high strength steels. So some things to keep in mind, kind of like I said, plugging those pieces together, things that we've already covered in those past webinars that if you haven't had a chance to watch, definitely go back and watch those, because it kind of will go together with what we're talking about today. But the first thing we need to really keep in mind and remember is all of the new steels and load paths. This is really going to give us an idea of where to expect that damage. And once we find that damage, is it repairable or not? You know, all of these repair procedures are based on an undamaged vehicle, especially when it comes to ADAS placement. And so if we're not starting with a straight vehicle that can square out, we're really just going to be chasing our tails down the line when it comes to our ADAS component placement. So we need to make sure those ADAS components are placing the right way too. That's one thing that we need to be measuring. We're going to find a lot of this information in our OE repair procedures. It's the place that we need to start. It's going to give us the info and the data on what ADAS is equipped on this car and if it needs to be calibrated. Maybe it doesn't need to be calibrated, dependent on the facts of loss of this collision. And so we don't need to measure the ADAS. So we can skip that step, but we have to start with those OE procedures. And then one of the biggest things that's overlooked right now, we just alluded to, is that post-repair confirmation. We need to start reducing our liability with all of these new technologies. We need to show that we've indemnified the owner of the vehicle, that we've put that vehicle back to its pre-loss condition, and document that as well. And then do that process before the sublet operation, whether it might be an alignment or a calibration, so we can ensure that the vehicle will take that alignment, that the vehicle will take that calibration. It won't fail that process. We don't have to play that dance of sending it back and forth to the dealer or back and forth to the alignment shop. We can just go ahead and do those measurements and capture that documentation ahead of time in order to make sure those processes go smoothly. Customers then pick up when they're expecting to. There's no hidden wrenches or hidden damage that we're going to find.
If you one of the
Roger,
things,
is there anything you want to add before we kind of
one of the things to keep in mind is that when you do that post-repair confirmation, that really allows the business owner to sleep at night by knowing that they have a record that shows that everything has been properly restored so that it's now within specifications. And also too, it's, you may think to yourself, well, is it profitable to do those things? Sleeping at night, I have no problem with. But when you go to sublet repairs and you're actually moving that car, whether it be in your business model or to another location, you have to consider that you have lost time running back and forth and the people involved if that vehicle does not align properly or calibrate properly.
Sure. No, that's a great point. Thanks, Roger. So before the repair measurements, this is really where we need to start focusing our attention. I think this is where we can make some of the most drastic improvements in our business model day to day. This is where we can start planning better. It's going to allow us to diagnose the complete damage of the vehicle. That's really the goal of measuring beforehand. We need to identify all the structural repairs needed. We need to check those OE repair procedures to make sure everything we want to repair is repairable. That could really change the course of the repair. And it also gives us an idea of how we're going to better assign this work. All of our technicians in our shop have different skill levels. Some are stronger at certain aspects of the repair than others. So this will help us properly dispatch that work where it needs to go in the shop. It also gives us the opportunity to document any UPD, any pre-existing damage that has nothing to do with the accident, but maybe overlaps in the area that we're repairing. And we don't want to be held accountable for it after the repair. And if we're not documenting that beforehand, especially if it's structural movement, if it's maybe been in an accident beforehand and they had part of it repaired but not all of it, we really want to capture that and know exactly where it sits. And by doing this, by capturing and getting that complete idea of the damages, we're going to avoid future part delays. We're going to be able to figure out that, okay, we're going to need a knuckle. We're going to need a lower cross member. Let's go ahead and get that coming now, so we're not waiting at the end of the repair when we send it out for that sublet operation. It's also going to prevent repairing total losses and total losses getting into the repair process. It's a little bit easier for these things to slip into our repair process today because there's a smaller margin of movement needed to justify repair or replacement of these certain steels. So by going ahead and measuring ahead of time, maybe it's the side of a vehicle, and we know, because the way that the vehicle constructed by the OE repair procedures, we know that if the outer panel has moved a certain amount where it's welded to the inner reinforcement, we know that inner reinforcement is damaged beyond repair too. And so now we've prevented that vehicle from slowing down a repair process, even entering the shop. We could have measured that maybe out on outside if we needed to. But doing that before the car enters the repair process is vital to eliminate those total losses entering. And all of this is going to start improving the throughput. You know, we're going to start avoiding supplements because we're capturing everything on that first estimate. There's going to be decreased downtime with the car just sitting around waiting for approval to move forward, because we already have approval. We've already gone through this process. And your rack is remaining open for repair activities, you know, where it's actually making money. It's not making money when you're using your frame machine to diagnose structural damage. That's not making money. It's only making money when you're truly, you know, pulling on the car and making those repairs. Roger, you want to add anything to any of these before we kind of move on?
Well, the biggest thing that I want to say is that by identifying things, like take, for example, a side aperture. The outer part of that aperture is not typically an advanced high-strength part. So it's repairable or might be replaceable, but we have a reinforcement that's closely located behind that outer skin. So how do we do this without cutting holes? And even if you cut an access hole into the side of the car to look at that part, you can't always photograph it and document it. So if I can actually just pull the rubber strip back and look at the pinch weld and measure that, and I see that I have movement on a non-repairable piece of metal, then I can justify it through the measurements of the actual image with the matrix wand to justify the replacement of the inner structure, even though I cannot see it, but I can accurately measure it with this tool.
Sure. No, that's a really good point. I think, you know, something else we need to consider when we're considering, you know, what tools maybe we want to do some of these measurements is the versatility of the tool. You know, maybe having a tool that you can get 3D measurements pretty easily in any scenario or any part of your shop, something that can be moved around. You know, maybe something that you don't have to tear the car all the way down, something that can measure directly through objects. That's going to make the ability to measure during each point of the repair process that much easier if it's not a fixed tool that has to stay in one certain location. So one of the things that we like to train our users in our shop to do is start off with point-to-point measurement. Start off in 2D. This is going to give us a really good idea of what areas of the car we can still trust by referencing that to some data, whether it be Mitchell data or whatever data source you're using. It's a great way to figure out what areas of the car are still intact that we can trust, where we can form those trusted triangles to start measuring other things in 3D. So in this specific example here with this vehicle, we actually used it in one of our other webinars, but it ties in really great. The question in area, or the area in question, is down in that passenger front hand corner, point number 9 and 7. This vehicle was kind of hit right there, almost at an angle, but pretty straight on. And this was actually a vehicle that we had at SEMA, and it had a bumper repair that we noticed on the bumper. It had been repaired before, and the ADAS sensor working that's placed right behind there off a bracket off of point number 9, that ADAS system wasn't working correctly. So we figured, okay, well, maybe there's some unidentified structural damage, something that wasn't repaired during that initial repair. So we went ahead and took it into a point-to-point measurement, and we found pretty right off that it wasn't squaring out. There's about 4 millimeters of damage, showing that point number 7 might be pushed back a little bit, that that's a little bit shorter than the other side. So, you know, we can see that here, the 1526 millimeters versus the 1522. And those colors coordinate with the lines that you see in the picture. So we can quickly go over, measure this against the reference data and figure out, okay, well, which measurements can we trust? What do we know is correct? And that's going to kind of give us an idea of, okay, well, we need to take this into a 3D application or not. Something's going on. What exactly is happening here? So when we take this into a 3D application, we find that there is some more damage there. Those points 7 and 9 are both swayed in towards the center line of the vehicle, about 6 to 7 millimeters. And there's also a little bit of height issue there at that point number 9. It's about 4 millimeters higher than the opposite side, that corresponding point number 10 on the left-hand side. So now we know, okay, there's no visual indicators necessarily on the car. We can't see any stress points or any marks or any damage at point number 9 or at point number 7. There's nothing for me to take a picture of or show an adjuster. I just know I'm gonna have trouble fitting those parts on after the repair process if I don't address this now. So this is a great way, by providing documentation, I can send this to an insurance adjuster. Okay, look, these definitely need to be addressed. This removes any objectivity from the repair itself. And now we know exactly that this, you know, what needs to happen with this car. Who is this which technician is this car going to go to? Is this car going to go up on the bench or not? How many times are we going to need to set up the tower before we pull? You're going to start answering these questions a lot quicker. Roger, is there anything you wanted to jump on before we kind of move on?
No, because this is the kind of documentation that you'll need to justify the repair of that area of the vehicle. Because sometimes even the colors of the car don't show minor movement, but yet we know that when you have ADAS systems mounted to an unrepaired area of that vehicle, they will not calibrate properly. So with
exactly.
So with this tool here, it not only confirms the movement, but it gives you the documentation that you will need to recover your charges.
Yeah, the other thing that we need to start measuring right up front to kind of ease the repair process is suspension. We can kind of apply these same concepts of point-to-point measurement to find out what our trusted points are based on our reference data, and then we can figure out off of that, okay, now we can pinpoint exactly what components are damaged. Could it be a knuckle? Is it a strut? Is it a lower control arm? But we need to start doing that up front. Order those parts on the front end and then have them installed by the time it goes, you know, out for an alignment. So you know without question it's going to take an alignment. And then if you have to worry about an ADAS calibration on top of that, you know the alignment won't be an issue when it goes for calibration either. You know, you've got both of those boxes checked.
You know, when you think about this too, Avery, when you have repairs taking place up north, especially with the season we just went through, which provides us with a little ice, snow, and sometimes freezing rain, the suspension components get damaged often. And the question comes up, which parts do I need to replace? And this tool, the Matrix, can actually measure that with accuracy, those specific parts. It can even do it off the car too. So here's the catch. If I can go ahead and identify the part or parts that are necessary from the impact, I can now order those parts, put them on the car, and then when I send it off to get the alignment done, I know that it's going to align the first time.
Yeah, you know, Roger, we also talk about, you know, preventing total losses from entering our repair process. And, you know, having a tool that has the versatility to be able to do some of, you know, upper body measurements or side body measurements outside to free up shop space, that really helps. You know, you could have something come right off of a tow truck, dropped in your back lot, run out, grab the wand and image that, and then go measure it back at your desk. So things like that really help. But when it comes to preventing these total losses coming through, you know, if we've got an example like this where it's hit pretty hard there in the rocker, and you can almost kind of see a little bit of a bow there. You know, when you look, there's a little bit of a curve from 0.8 over to 0.6 through 0.7. You can almost see it bending up. You know, how can we use some of the OE repair procedures, Roger, and some of the things that we know about advanced metals in this scenario to quickly identify what we need to do?
Well, by taking and removing the weather strip on the door and then looking at that pinch weld, providing the measurements. I mean, there's an interesting story that goes behind that image that you're talking about, Avery, and that was we were at the repair shop and they had the car disassembled, but we asked the technician, what do you think is wrong? And also, how would you reverse the damages by making your necessary pulls? And interesting enough, that individual went ahead and gave answers that didn't line up with the measurements that we just finished taking. So what that means is they would have spent additional time trying to correct the damages from the assessments they were making by just shooting from the hip. This alleviates that because you have actual measurements that are so accurate, and if you pay attention to them, which all people will, that they can make the right pulls the first time and save a lot of time, plus improve the accuracy.
Yeah, so in this example, these are actually opposite sides of the vehicle. So the side being analyzed there is the driver's side. You can see where the board is kind of resting up against the steering wheel. If you look at the right-hand image, it's actually that's actually the passenger side of the vehicle, but the system's inverted the image so you can kind of visualize that better. It makes comparing those points that much easier. But then all we simply did was compare that one opening to the other opening in 3D space to find out, you know, exactly how much those points number 8, 7, and 6 moved. And you can see it's pretty drastic over on that damage, over in the damaged points. You can see the width, how far in it's been pushed in towards the center of the vehicle, 12 millimeters, 9 millimeters, 13, 18 millimeters. And there's also some height. You can see there at 0.7, 6, and 8, kind of what we were talking about. You can kind of see that bend there. Well, it's high. It's high about 7 millimeters. So that makes sense. What we're seeing lines up with the measurements. It makes sense. It's going to make it that much easier to justify for our insurance adjuster.
Sure does.
So the next part of measuring is during the repair. This is probably what we're most comfortable with as collision professionals right now. But one thing that we need to consider is, you know, how does ADAS play into that? Roger, you know, what are we kind of looking at in this picture?
Well, we're looking at the backup sensor and the quarter panel area. And so what we want to make sure is that we have confirmed placement of this bracket that holds that sensor. Now, if we had, you know, like we mentioned earlier with the bumper cover where we had slight damage on the outside of it, you know, what you have, you know, you could have moved this area. Now, if I'm going to fix that, I'm not just going to go ahead and replace the part. So if I do that during the repair process, I can take steps or images and then measure the locations of the mounting points to confirm that I had them in the right place. And here's the unique part: before I paint it and before I send it out for calibration. So it's verifying the location before we get further down the repair process.
Yeah, and sometimes kind of what you were talking about, that ADAS sensor might have direct or indirect contact. Maybe the impact was down towards the rebar in the lower corner. There wasn't direct contact to any of the mounting locations, but who's to say it wasn't necessarily sucked in? There's so many different shapes and movements in that metal. It would be really hard to repair. And I talked to some shops down here in Florida, Roger, and a lot of times, you know, it's something that looks totally repairable, but they feel like they should replace it just because there's no way for them to confirm where that bracket's sitting. Is it sitting where it needs to be? You know, it looks like an easy enough repair, but who knows? So it's important to go ahead and have a way to document that and compare it to the other side.
I mean, that's a good point, Avery. For years, I mean, we used to go ahead and look at suspension and go, where's the bends? How do we know that they're not bent? But by measuring, you can confirm that when you have unusual visuals or unusual body styles, you can confirm that with accurate measurements by using the matrix wand.
Sure. And then, you know, during the repair process, we can also, you know, use measuring for some quality control too. We can confirm, you know, the quality of replacement parts that are coming in before they go to paint. You know, that's been a big problem with certain lift gates and deck lids. You know, they get stacked 10 high when they're coming over, when they're being transported from whatever facility they were made in. And the bottom ones, you know, the one that was lowest, that absorbing all that weight's lost a little bit of curvature. You know, this has been a known problem. Well, you know, you think you get that OEM part in from whatever manufacturer, you know, just sending it right into paint. No one thinks to test fit it or to measure it. But go ahead, confirm the quality of replacement parts. You know, you get a donor door in, door assembly off a salvage car. Let's go ahead and make sure it's not torqued at all up in the frame before we try to fit it to the car. So doing things like that, and or instead of hanging that door 5 times to figure out where that B pillar needs to be, hang the door, then do a pull, then hang the door to see where it needs to, how much more movement you need, and then do a pull, and then hang the door again. Don't do that. Just let's use technology. Let's measure it once. Let's figure out where it needs to go, be done with it, and then hang the door once. It makes a lot more sense. And then you've got that documentation that you did it right before it goes to paint.
That's a great point, Avery, because sometimes the things that you want to know how that metal was distorted or how it's being corrected is hidden once you put the part on. The only thing you can really check for when it comes down to the fit of that part is the gaps. But it's other things that I have to worry about, like the weather seal contacts. So by measuring it, it provides that more accurate outcome in a shorter period of time than it does to test fit the part.
Sure. So in that example that we started with in that previous slide, with the blind spot monitor sensor, when we compare it to the other side, then we are able to confirm, okay, it's within the structural tolerances of the vehicle. We're good to go. Unless the OEM and the repair procedures gives us a different tolerance for that ADAS sensor, it's pretty safe to go with those structural tolerances. And now we know when we send it out for that calibration, we're not going to have any trouble. It'll calibrate. So one of the great things, about the wand is, the versatility of the points you're able to measure. And I think this really comes into play with some of the upper body measurements that we have to do nowadays. We need to have that versatility to not only rely on our traditional reference data, those predetermined points that Chief or Caroline or Mitchell has determined for us. We need to be able to measure things like, we can measure all the way from the glass opening. Those are going to be symmetrical on either side. We can find other symmetrical feature points, kind of like here at the tail light, tail light pocket, or we can find simple body lines, kind of like down at point number 3. And we can find these and measure these points from each side, compare them to the other side, and then we can start measuring other things off of those points once we find those trusted points, kind of like that blind spot monitor sensor down at the bottom towards the exhaust. Using those trusted reference points will really help us start building off. Kind of similar to when we measure the lower body of a vehicle, the frame of a vehicle. We start and we square off the center section of the vehicle and we start working off of there. It's that same concept, but applied to the upper body of the vehicle.
I mean, think about this. Your imagination is your only hindrance here. If I think about this, where the outer panels of the car are welded to the structure, and the structure is critical for the ADAS alignments or the fit of any component, then if I can go ahead and measure one side of the car that's undamaged by using the body lines, and then going to the other side of the vehicle, I can use that to accurately correct my panel or align it for the replacement of the panel. So body lines are some of those features that the Matrix Wand can do that other measuring equipment can't do.
Yeah, Roger. So with this same exact example, when we go and we compare it to the opposite side, again, you can see how the image being analyzed there on the left is inverted from the image there on the right. You can see the board is actually facing opposite ways, the logo on the board, if you're looking closely onto that. But when we compare where that sensor is in 3D space in relation to our trusted triangle from one side of the vehicle to the other side, we can see over on in our graph over on the right-hand side of the screen, all of our points are within our structural tolerance. So we know that sensor, when we go to send it to recalibrate after the paint department is done, we won't have any issue. It's going to take the calibration, and we're going to be able to send that car home. So the other area I wanted to touch on is, kind of, we don't need to, we really need to stop hanging doors and parts of the vehicle to determine if there's structural damage has been resolved or not. This is another example where we can go ahead and use reference data that's provided to find trusted areas of the vehicle, measurements that we know we can trust, and we can start building off of that and take it into 3D space. There's no reason for us to go ahead and put that deck lid on, lower it down, figure out if the quarter panel is where it needs to go or if the rear body is where it needs to go. we can easily just go ahead and measure that, capture that documentation, and then see, okay, well, I haven't pulled that rear body all the way back to where it needs to be. We're still a millimeter out of tolerance. So I know that I need to keep on going. Roger, is there anything you kind of want to add on to that?
Well, your taillights are going to fit better. Your taillights, the water seal areas are going to fit better. The frame rails, everything that I can see in that image, I can measure. And so if I can see it, I can measure it. And if I check all these components out, then do I really need to start test fitting these parts ahead of time? The measurement will be far more accurate when it's all said and done.
Sure, that's a great point. And this is the biggest part that is underutilized as far as measuring goes in collision repair is definitely the post-repair measurements. After the repair, once the vehicle's done and the parts fit, we as collision repair professionals, we're just kind of like, okay, let's get it home. When are they picking up? But there's so much that we can capture after the repair that's going to help us in the future in many different ways. I think one of the biggest things is being able to reduce your future liability. You're able to confirm that the repairs have been completed, the customer's been indemnified, you know that the car is back to where the OEM intended it to be. It's gonna respond the way it needs to if there's a second collision in the future. But you've reduced that liability. You can go home, you can go to sleep and not worry that you didn't send that car home correctly. And then you also give yourself the opportunity for reference data. Now we can use that reference data that, the vehicle that is structurally where it needs to be. You can use that as reference data in the future. So when we go to compare one side of the vehicle to the other, I'm sure you've measured more, or you've fixed more than one Honda Odyssey in your shop, or you fixed more than one Ford F-150. So why would you have to, why go back and forth and remeasure for the opposite side? You can just measure right off of that reference data from the vehicle that you fixed prior. And it really helps just speed things up. Every little bit helps when it comes to that shop efficiency. And then we can also start doing things like verifying calibration. I know this is one of Jason's favorite things, but we can start documenting the setup process to make sure that the targets are where they need to be in relation to the car, all the way down to the millimeter. We know that we set up that process exactly the way that the OEM intended. We're going, so we can fall back on that, put that in the file, and if that ever came into question in the future, we've got those measurements right there. And with a subscription to Fenderbolt, you can actually go back in and start measuring those images all over. You can pick brand new points if you need to, but if there's another area of interest that wasn't necessarily important during the initial repair, but now that the vehicle's come back, you want to measure something else, you have all of that ability to do that. And that's going to be really, really important as we move forward with more and more complex repairs.
Avery, one of the things that comes up a lot is that, if we have a car that's damaged and it damages both sides of the vehicle, how do we basically do comparative measurements then? Well, in the previous broadcast, you saw Avery go back in and pull up the Mitchell data that allows us to use those specifications to reestablish both sides of the vehicle. Or if we're looking at trying to put something back that has not been measured out as thoroughly as you would like it, you can find an undamaged vehicle and measure that vehicle up to confirm to the car you're repairing. So there's a couple different ways to achieve that when you have both sides of the car damaged from the original wreck.
Sure. No, absolutely. That's a great point, Roger. Hey, Jason, sorry, I think we cut you off when we were talking.
No, Roger covered it. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. So when we go and do our post-repair checks, we can start checking things really quickly. Maybe it's the angle of a sensor, the way it's facing compared to the rest of the vehicle. But start doing checks like that, verifying and documenting that the structure is where it needs to be. So like this vehicle, fresh out of paint, before we put that bumper cover back on, let's go ahead and quickly let's do our post repair image, make sure everything's where it needs to be, the sensor where it needs to be in relation to the quarter panel, and compared to both sides, they're all within a structural tolerance in comparative of each other. So we know we can slap this bumper on, we can send it to an alignment, it can get its alignment, we can send it to calibration, it's going to pass the calibration, and it can go home on time. The other thing that we kind of mentioned was that calibration setup. why not go ahead and set up your targets and then measure them out with the wand as well. See that they're exactly where they need to be placed. And the more and more that you use a tool like the wand, whatever it might be that you're using your measurements, the more and more creative you can get and realize there are other things that you can measure, because it's going to become more and more important to be able to measure these items on the car and to document them for compensation as well. Roger, is there anything you want to kind of add before we close this up?
Well, as you can see with the Matrix Wand, it's very versatile, and it allows you to take it anywhere throughout your business model to perform the types of inspections or measurements that you'll need. And with that said, as Avery's pointed out, with the before, during, after, and the after really is the sleep well at night snapshot. And but it's going to also pay you back in dividends when you find out that you're not going to have as many returns saying that things could not be accomplished when the car was sent there, either for the alignment or for the ADAS calibration. So we have one other question coming in. It says, what are your options on both sides of damage? We've got that. How does this differ from something like a different type of equipment that measures out there? I'm not going to name the name at the moment. And then what we have with this tool here is that it's measuring with the accuracy of the pixels within the image. So two things are happening. You have accurate measurements and you have documentation. And it also allows me to measure points that typically aren't measured with other types of equipment. Now, we're not here to say that the other equipment makers are bad, because when you're fixing the car, you need something that can be used during the process of repairs, and you can use both the Matrix or that piece of equipment. But this tool here allows you to think outside the box to perform the measurements that you may need for the type of impacts that you're getting.
Yeah, Roger, to kind of expand on that, I think when we look at, especially, this is kind of applies for every tool in the industry, but especially when we're talking about measuring and 3D measuring, all of the tools out there really focus on different things, and it's really like comparing apples and oranges. They all kind of have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. They're all designed to do different things, and a lot of them work really well in tangent together. This system working with a traditional, frame setup, frame and bench setup, or something else. So I think it really just depends on what your business needs, what you already have, and kind of how those pieces work together. When it comes to the wand, though, we offer it a little bit different way than we used to. So if you weren't on our last two webinars, we've made some quick changes to the wand. There are, it's a brand new color, so it's that red color. It used to be gray. And we've also changed the blueprinting station. The blueprinting station is now a little bit larger. It gives a little bit more workspace, but it's a great place to keep all of your technology tools that you're using throughout the repair, maybe your scan tool or other laptops and things that you're using for recalibrations. You can keep all of that equipment in one place and have a technology station. So that's a great tool. The other thing that we've recently updated is Fenderbolt. Fenderbolt is our new cloud connected software for our Mitchell repair analysis software. It's kind of the same software, but on steroids. It gives us the ability to support the shop that much better with more training options, with some more support options. And that kind of brings me into our next point real quick before we move on and finish this out, is our free online training. Fenderbolt has our online training already built into it. It's ICAR certified, so all of our shops who have the wand can go on there, access that training 24/7. If they get a new employee, they can quickly go on there, do their training, get their ICAR credits. But what we've done is, with all this downtime, we've made this training accessible to everyone. So anyone can log on with this MTX 2020 promo code. They can get a version of our online training that you can take where you don't need to have the wands to complete, and still get 1 credit hour per employee that completes that. We're going to go ahead and pay for that credit hour on our end at Matrix. We just want everyone to have the ability to learn more about measuring, get more familiar with measuring all around, and make some use of all of this downtime that we have right now. So with that being said, I would love to invite everyone to log on, do that training, and then also set up a demo with us. We kind of did some high-level stuff, but let's set up a demo where we can log on to the actual software together. We can show you the ins and outs, how you pick points, how we take something from 2D measurements into 3D measurements, and the different applications that the wand can be used in the shop. So with that being said, I think I'm going to flip it back over and turn it over to Kristen. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in with us during these 3 webinars. We really appreciate you guys taking the time and investing in yourselves and learning more about the industry.
Awesome. So I appreciate it. There's a couple of questions. There's one I'm going to take, and I'll say it. And I don't know, Roger may want to answer it too, but if Roger doesn't want to answer it, I'll answer it. But the question is, how does the system differ from the AccuVision?
Well, I'm going to let you take that then.
So
I don't want to basically, here's the thing, like Avery was saying, apples and oranges. And so, we have a lot more versatility with the Matrix Wand. I think that a lot of the measuring systems that exist out there today are excellent. The thing is, though, how versatile are they? And what part of major repairs do I want to apply the different types of equipment? And so that's I would leave it at that. Because they all measure well. It's just how much versatility can I get? And do I always want to keep on putting my car into a location, whether on a twin post lift or on a bench, to get that outcome that I need at that moment in time?
And I think a lot of it has to go with your shop setup too. A shop that's maybe in LA who can do more repairs outside might want a tool that's a little bit more versatile, that they don't have to maybe bring as much stuff outside to set up, maybe like as a tripod. They want something that they can quickly bring in and outside. So a lot of it has to do with your setup too, on what tool is going to work best for you.
Yeah, I've had a limited use of the AccuVision, just a couple of tours with it running through booths at trade shows. Well, it cannot go out in the parking lot. From what I've seen, there's a tower thing that's that it has to be in front of it, that I guess the tool's reading from or whatever. To me, I'm almost like carrying around my mobile target. If I think about the old Chief system, I'm carrying the target and it's shooting back to that thing that I put in front of the vehicle. So it doesn't really go outside. It's got to be powered, which is a limitation. And then you're going to have to, for upper body, you can pretty much do whatever you want, but it's dependent on the Mitchell database. So you got to have measurements in the Mitchell system for what you're measuring. So with the wand, I don't necessarily have, it's great if I have measurements from an OE, particularly, for what the Mitchell database is to compare things to. But when I need to measure something that's not necessarily in the database, I can do that with the wand. So that's one of the things I like by having the comparison.
Hey, Kristen, we also have a question from John from Perfection. I just want to address.
There's a couple. Hold on.
Charges, can you?
I got it, Avery.
Oh, sorry.
We got a couple to go
through.
So, so there's that one. But specifically, Mike, if you want to call me, we can go side to side, because you may have more experience with that AccuVision than I do, and then we can kind of talk through it. I've only seen it at trade shows, so I don't want to say much. Dean wants to know, what do you do when you have damage to both sides of the vehicle and you can't do comparison measurements?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that we can address that with the wand. One of my favorite ways, we call it a vehicle match comparison. We can do this a few different ways. We talked about this kind of like the reference data. So the more vehicles that you measure that are the same, kind of like the Ford F-150, you can use a vehicle that you've already measured before that has trusted points. So we can compare it to that vehicle, or we can do a vehicle match. Maybe if you're a dealership shop or have someone dealership nearby, you've got a late model vehicle that there isn't any spec data for, a 2020. You can run up to the dealership, snap a picture of that vehicle, and then use that vehicle as a comparison image, a reference image. We can also, in certain areas of the vehicle, we can use our active Mitchell 3D map. So Mitchell makes certain vehicles after 2015, they give 3D data for the underbody of the vehicle and the underhood of the vehicle. So we can, if that's available, we can also pair it up to that as well.
Awesome. So Sergio, are you there? Can you unmute yourself and join us, Mr. Technician?
Yes.
How would a tech, so Stefano wants to know how a tech would use this during the repair process.
So what I kind of do or explain to people is going back to the old school ways. How were cars getting repaired before 3D measuring? You know, with the old tape and ruler type of repairs. The thing with the matrix wand is right up front. It tells you where you got to repair things to. So a technician can use it during the repair process. We always get the question asked is, do we have live pull feature? We don't. The system is a static image. It's not video. But I know if I need to pull something out 10 millimeters, I can track that and be able to get it to measurement, and then another quick image of it, and I can measure it. So technicians use it quite a bit all the time. I support a lot of different shops. A lot of times when they're going through repairs, you know, they'll call and ask if they're doing it, you know, doing it correctly using the wand. Lately, a lot of them's been blind spot monitor sensors. You know, they're damaging that area. Not enough to repair or replace a quarter panel, but repairable. They just want to know if they're doing it correctly, and they're able to get that back to you know, within a couple of millimeters. And so a technician can use it various different ways. Obviously, doing it up front is going to be very vital for the technician. So when they get the vehicle, they can get a printout of the damage, you know, and exactly in millimeters. So they already kind of have an idea of what the damage is. Now they can come up with a better game plan about how they're going to do those repairs, and, you know, potentially choose what system may be the better system or process to use to repair that.
Yeah. Yep. It's definitely a good tool. Roger and Avery, I'm gonna ask Perfection's question a little bit. I don't want to say loaded, but unloaded. So not just how many times on an estimate can you charge for measuring a vehicle with this tool, but are there cases where you would have a pre-measure maybe in your blueprint department that might involve a wand, but then still need to measure over in the structural department if you were using something else for actually corrective pulling and repairs? Would there be multiple charges?
Well, there could be. And when you get to that, so let's talk about that for a second. The first thing that you want to make sure is how you document it on your estimate. You don't want to put it as you've done previous measurements in the past, because that typically includes different things like setup measure, as it's been referred to. So if you're doing this, one thing you have to do is be able to justify or validate what's going on. You know, so because you're always going to get pushback that says, you know, is this necessary every time we do a car? If you can come up with the reasons that we've given you in this broadcast, meaning you're going to check for ADAS locations, you're going to check to see if you have structural impact, you're going to check to see what the OEMs say about the area that's in repair. So knowing that you have to confirm the car back to a specification of an undamaged vehicle, all those things are taken in consideration, and then you'll make up your line entry for the measurements that you're going to create in that part of the vehicle. And then you have a discussion with them, but you have to be able to stand on the fact of why do you need this? And see, in the past, we used to be able to fix a lot of the car based on just a visual inspection. Well, we can't do that today. And that's why we said, go to the OEM procedures to see if it needs to be calibrated in the area that you're dealing with has a sensor, then accuracy in that area is key. Avery, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Roger, I want to add on to something that you mentioned towards the beginning of your explanation, but I think it's really important that we focus on how we present it, how we word this on the estimate. That's where you're going to get the biggest impact. If we're doing something that's pre the repair, we're going to avoid words like measurements. We're going to use more words like structural diagnostic. We're going to start saying things like blueprint discovery. That way, when we go to the actual, when you go and throw the car up on maybe your car liner for when you're doing the actual repair, or if you're using the wand for the repair, then you can still use setup and measure and capture that as well for your setup and measure. So there's I think a lot of it has to do with the terminology that you're using on the estimate, and then how you present that to the adjuster.
Yeah. So I'll add something else, because I don't really care about the adjuster. I've made that pretty clear in my, and I was one, but I don't care about them. To me, when I sit down with a customer and I present this, you ask a customer what their number one concern is about collision repair. You're going to get two answers. You're going to get two responses from them. Will the paint match, and does my car have frame damage? Those are the two things that a consumer is always worried about. So part of my intake process, that interview, that calibration meeting I have where I'm sitting down the customer and we're going over their repairs and I'm getting them on my page, this is one of the things we discuss. And I tell them I'm going to pre-measure your car. Here's why I do it. I want to confirm that your car either does or doesn't have frame damage so that we can address it, so that we can take care of, I know it's one of your concerns. And they usually nod their head and go, yeah, that's my concern. My pre-measure has a fee. You set your fee for whatever. It's not an hourly rate. And the customer agrees that they're going to be financially responsible for that pre-measure, whether the insurer pays for it or not. If we pre-measure and there's nothing wrong, awesome. They get a copy of that WAND report that says, here's the verification for you to keep forever that said your car did not have any structural damage from this accident. If we do find something, then we're moving pre-measure and then into setup measure. And typically the insurance companies have not balked at those two charges at all. When you actually put the pre-measure report with the in-process structural report, I haven't had a problem, even from the insurers that are a little bit more, I don't want to say difficult, but more cognizant of those fees, right? Then that post pre-delivery verification report, if you want to do a third report, if I've got a structure report after I fix the car, I really don't need a third one. I don't charge for that. But if you wanted to, then I would recommend that that's another discussion with the customer, that you just say, hey, I'll go back over here and I'll do a post-repair measure again and give you another report that verifies it's clean. I can say that the WAND reports are, palatable is not the right word, and I should probably find the words for it, but because there's a picture of the vehicle involved with that report, there's more, I don't want to say trust or acceptance by the customer than when I hand them a traditional frame machine report that's got, you know, numbers and a diagram on it. So there's some value to that documentation having the photo. So I don't know if that helps perfection, but that's how I present it. And customers are okay with paying $75 for $100 to have something in their hand that says, I have no frame damage, specifically when they go to trade it in. Helps with a couple of times when some Carfax reports have showed up and said, Bob's Body Shop reports the car is having frame damage. Oh no, here you go. So
I want to go back and play off of what you just saw Kristen do. And this is really important for all of you on this broadcast, is that, do you know that your estimators can communicate with confidence the details like Kristen just did when she first started to respond? If you don't know that, this is something that you want to practice with your estimators. You want to make sure that they can stand before anybody with confidence on why they're doing something. And so by building that up, you're actually going to have better success with all this than you will if we just wanted to check it. That's not the answer. Notice that Kristen gave a lot of detail on why we're doing what we're doing. And that's important. Kristen?
Yep. Yeah. The customer buy-in. Roger, you know, I mean, hell, you trained me, dude. But,
Yep.
but from that insurer side, once that customer's on board and the customer's pushing for reimbursement, I don't have a whole lot of ground to say no, but I can tell a body shop no all day long. Sometimes it was a hobby just to tell you no to see what you guys would do. So, and then I'd get those home office complaints, but that's another story. All right.
Yes.
All right. Dee wants to know, are you storing and taking data from other shops to help create a database for locations such as sensors and/or suspension? Or suspension?
So, Sergio, if you want to take this from me, feel free. But this is something that we are working on. So this is not available yet, but we are working on the possibility of having a community database where we can verify certain measurements, and so shop users can access those if they don't have reference data or they need some kind of reference data.
That's correct, what you're saying, Avery, there. That's one of the reasons why we've launched our Fenderbolt. Our Fenderbolt, it makes it cloud connected. So we are able now to capture some of that data. But at this point, we're still not sharing it. We're still in the works of validating stuff so that we can be able to share it to our customers.
But yeah, we're always doing research and development on the back end to add new features like that.
Everything is a progress. I don't know if you can talk much about it, but I don't know if you can talk about it, but I'm going to tell everybody about it. No, Sergio, last time you were physically here at the office working with me and Larry, there's my Arkansas. You had been visiting with some OEs to discuss this sensor placement and stuff and getting measurements. And I know several different OEs were working with you. Are we getting progress on the OEs producing data like that where we never would have thought we needed that stuff before?
Actually, yes, we have. We've actually visited some. We've had discussions with some. So that is in the works. Obviously, we're trying to get the bigger ones, the more, I should say, normal vehicles that you see in shops, trying to get them on board. And some of them has gave us the okay. Obviously, what's going on right now has actually canceled one of our get-togethers with or two get-togethers with some of the OEMs for that exact thing. So
yeah, and to kind of go off of that a little bit more, just to let everyone know, the OEMs are really cognizant that they don't have a good way to measure those sensors right now. They're actively looking for better ways. They're going through those steps and procedures. So they're aware that it's not an easy thing to repair. They're aware that not everyone's going to pull out a plumb bob and start marking things on the floor. It's not realistic. That they're actively looking for better solutions.
Yeah, that always cracks me up. I have a $50,000 welder, and then to deliver the car, I need a piece of string and a roll of tape.
very true.
That's usually when I step in the shop and go, well, heck, we're back to my skill level now. Get out of the way. I'm taking over. So Mike asked, what gem, I'm going to say, okay, what OEM certifications does this meet? Thanks, Mike. I'm sorry. Careful, I'm from Arkansas. I got to read slow. But what OEM certifications, are there any considerations?
Sure, Sergio, you want to take this one? This is more along your lines.
So yeah, there's various different ones. One of the first OEMs was a Honda. They actually invited us when they manufactured their Acura NSX. They needed something to verify structural damage, and we actually helped them build a lot of their database because they have a 1 millimeter tolerance on their vehicle. So Honda was one of the very first. There's other OEMs that fall under other certifications. Can't think of the name. Avery, help me here with the ones.
The Assured Performance Network.
Yes.
Yeah. So all of anyone that falls under that category, we've got the thumbs up with.
So if an OE had if an OE lists a requirement that just says you must have a 3-dimensional measuring system, it's good. If an OE has a specific call out for a name brand, then of course you're going to want to follow those. And then keep in mind, for a lot of shops, you're still going to have the possibility of having another system in your structural bay when you get to pulling. And then you also are going to need a solution for your blueprinting and teardown department. A long time ago, I used to have a couple of sawhorses and an extra ladder rack for my Carliner Vision. Awesome, but was still a pain to set up every time I had to pull it over to the blueprint bay to get some stuff done. So having a good mobile, regardless of whatever OEM certifications you have, because that's completely separate in your blueprinting department and SOPs, but having a good blueprint, tear down, triage solution, because we preach it at every Collision Hub course. You got to measure every car every time. I don't care. Even if it's a key scratch. And I'm not saying measure it because it's part of the key scratch. I'm saying measure it because I need to know everything about that vehicle right now before I touch it. Because once it leaves, I'm going to be accountable for everything. I don't want it to come back on me later and realize, I was working on the rear and the whole front end was knocked out. We actually have a case like that going on in Texas right now. And it's going to be a PRI buyback. And I feel sorry for the shop because bottom line, if they'd have pre-measured it, they probably never would have touched the car. And they repaired it and sent it out. And now the customer's back against them. So pre-measure, pre-measure, pre-measure. And with that, everybody stop talking to me. Awesome.
Yeah. No, good question.
No, that was a good comment, Kristen. That was
as soon as I mentioned PRI, everybody's like,
yeah. Scatter.
Kirsten, that actually brings up a point. We got a lot of shops that are doing PRIs now that are using the Matrix Wand. They're able to go mobily to use the Matrix Wand to verify structural damage in vehicles or if things were repaired correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
so
I think
we're seeing a lot more of that going on.
Roger probably does the same thing I do. You put the wand in the back seat of your car and drive wherever you want to go, take your pictures, come back to the shop later.
That's true.
So I can drive around town. I had looked at a concept for Wow. I don't know, Jason, did I sign an NDA? I don't remember. Anyway, okay, there was a small, they're an MSO, but by no means are they large. I think they have 6 locations at making a mobile estimating van. And this project was in works before COVID, but now it's ramping up with COVID. Designing those vans, and thank God for that State Farm mobile estimating van experience and what I learned from that colossal cluster of buying vans. But the wand was a tool, and we didn't even have to, it's software based, and I can put the wand in the mobile van and charge it and take off that day, and I can drive to 3 or 4 or 5 customers' houses and come back, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, and then measure in front of the TV later that night at 8 p.m.
That's the life of a CAD adjuster, though. I mean, it was 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. or a.m. every night, so 14-hour work days. But it's a nice, the mobility of it just gives you so many options. You can run down the road. I get calls every now and then from a shop that's got a customer there, and they don't want to put it on their full frame machine and remeasure, and I'm like, hold on. So it works out.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, guys, I appreciate it. If you ever wanted to have a demo, absolutely give them a call. If you will be following and paying attention as we lay out a maze schedule, we've got a 15 Toyota RAV4 back here that's going to get blueprinted, and we're going to just webcam the whole experience as we go through it. And you'll be watching Sergio most likely train Jason and rechain, because I forget everything, as we go through that process to blueprint that car. So if you want to laugh at us or live vicariously, either way, feel free to take the demo that way or give them a call. Probably won't laugh at Jason. Jason's on point, but you'll definitely laugh at me. So.
Well, about that.
Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, any other questions? Anybody want to unmute their mic and ask anything or type anything new in? Well, killer job again, as usual. Thanks, Avery. Thanks, Sergio. Thanks, Roger, for joining in. Roger, did you have your information up there again?
Avery, you can go back to the opening slide there. It has our contact information. That'd be fantastic.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, not a problem.
Maybe. Let's see if I can figure this out. I don't know if it's got your contact info there. I think it just says your name.
The contact information is Accountable Estimating. My name is Roger Cada, C-A-D-A. And my email is roger.cada, C-A-D-A, at accountableestimating.com. So that's Roger, R-O-G-E-R, no D, .cada, C-A-D-A, at accountableestimating.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't checked out their courses on accountable estimating, just before we jump off, I'd strongly recommend go check out the photo estimating course.
All right. And then if y'all ever get a chance, send Roger a sympathy email, because he did have to train me at the ripe old age of 19 and, and put up with me for a very long time. So I think I'm responsible for a little bit of that hair loss. So y'all, y'all send him a sympathy message and maybe a card or a gift or some gift cards for going to eat or whatever. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. We will see you tomorrow. Great.
Take care now.